You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 18th of February 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Today we'll be exploring a particularly thorny question in today's environment. What makes you feel proud of your country? It is a question that was asked of more than 30,000 people in 25 countries for a new survey by the Pew Research Center in Washington, D.C., released while the Winter Olympics in Milan are underway. Here at Monocle, we've also put the question to our own staffers. We'll hear from our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, first of all, and then we'll speak with the researchers.
It was interesting how many people, use this question, which asked them about what they're proud of, to say what they're actually not proud of. People are pretty frustrated with how politics is working in many countries.
Richard Wyke, Director of Global Attitudes Research at Pew, on just how tricky this topic really is. We'll then turn our attention to three Monocle staffers: Fernando Augusto Pacheco for Brazil, Chiara Mela for Italy and the UK, and Nick Manise for Australia. Finally, we'll hear about sporting pride from the head of the Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. And a very warm welcome to this special edition of The Briefing on Wednesday. We're going to be hearing from the researchers behind this Pew survey on what makes people proud of their country in a little while. But first, kicking us off today is Andrew Tuck, Monocle's editor-in-chief, who joins me now in studio. Andrew, thanks so much for agreeing to kick us off on this.
And look at me wearing the bunting and flying the Union Jack on my hat as well as I come in.
Well, exactly, yes. We asked everyone to wear their special national colours. Absolutely. I'm going to just jump right in and start with that simple question to you. What makes you proud of being British?
So I know we're going to unpack this as
we're going to
unpack it as an issue. But first of all, even the language about saying you're proud of Britain is so torturous in the UK at the moment.
Yes.
It's been made a thing that if you're proud of Britain, you must be an idiot by the right, because this is a broken nation and there's nothing left to believe in. All the good virtues are gone. All the things we cared about have vanished. And on the left, pride in nation has always been a challenging option here in the UK. They've never known quite how to stand behind the flag and be proud of that. But I think when you leave it to ordinary people and you talk to people about the place they live, maybe pride isn't the word that they would go to, but there's a belief in Britain that I think that I would still back into. I think that when you go out and meet people are more tolerant than you would imagine. I think even in choppy times, the opportunities for access to the arts, to beauty through the arts, through inspiration is extraordinary, whether that's through the worlds of television, through music, through theatre, through galleries. I was speaking to somebody yesterday who's an American, like half of you is, based here in the UK, who said that, I said, how do you find it being transposed from NYC to London? And they said, I just can't believe the access to culture you get here, which is kind of off the charts. And I think that for me, I've been using the city the last couple of weekends because I've been here. And it does make you proud that there's free access to so much knowledge. And I think also that we worry that we're a bit old fuddy-duddy and we're slow to move in some areas. But again, when I look at entrepreneurship, arts, design, I think it makes me proud that I think we're a nation of innovators, not always on the high scale of Silicon Valley, not always maybe on the perfection of a Milan atelier, but in that crunchy bit in the middle where you experiment, where you do new things. I think that makes me proud of Britain. I think that Britain has an ability to even now come up with solutions and do good things away from the world of the political parties.
So, Andrew, I did throw you in at the deep end there, and I appreciate that was a very eloquent answer to a difficult question, because that is kind of what we're trying to do with this show. And interestingly, kind of as you touched on in this survey from Pew, the UK was actually had the highest level of respondents of any of the 25 countries who answered the question, what makes them proud of their country, with the counter, which is that they were not actually proud of their country. What do you make of that? What is it about the UK where we really wrestle with this?
Well, first of all, I think people have always wrestled with it. Probably from the 60s, 70s on, they've never been sure that they can stand behind the flag as many Americans would do. So Americans, even now, would be proud of their flag for what they think it represents about America. We've seen that at the Winter Olympics. Even people who have concerns about what the administration is doing have said, look, despite all that, I'm proud of being American and this is what America stands for. I don't think British people have been very good at articulating that. The flag from the 70s onwards was... For many people, it felt like it was hijacked by the far right, by the National Front at that time. So people were uneasy about it. We had, essentially 4 nations packed into this union who were all tugging for their own identities. So if you were Scottish or you were Welsh, maybe you found some pride in your own country's identity as part of that union. But the idea of being proud to be British was, again, a difficult thing to express, because the union was looking at new solutions about how it should operate and run. And I think even now that's the same for many of those disparate parts. But I do think that when you have key moments, when there is a challenge or a moment of victory, or a moment when you can celebrate national identity in a way that's almost a bit camp, or a bit, I don't know, where you don't have to really believe in everything that's happening. The Queen's funeral was in a moment. Why do so many people come out if they don't give a damn about this country? They came out because what was passing was not only a monarch, but was a period of history which they felt invested in. And I think that whether you see it with sporting moments, whether you see it with certain national moments that are divorced from politics, then people can't stop themselves, and then they do show this pride. So I think it's there. I just think it sits in British people a little bit more like sediment, like sand at the bottoms of their souls, and only when it's kicked up by some momentous event does it rise to the top. And we're like, hold on a minute, I know we're disparaging about our nation every single day, but give me a break. We're British, leave us alone.
Well, Andrew, as you know, we've been asking this question of a lot of our colleagues as well, what makes them feel proud of their country. And I wanted to play one of those answers to you. We're going to be playing a few of them throughout this show. Here is our German colleague, Hannah Gist.
What makes me proud of Germany is the teamwork. You can really see it in moments like the World Cup, especially in 2014. I think there's something very German about staying calm under pressure and delivering when it matters most. I'm really, really excited for Germany to play in 2026 in the World Cup. I'm also proud of Germany's commitment to sustainability. I love the way my family in Germany recycles, and I wish more countries would do the same. And also a special shout out to the Pfand system.
Hannah Gist there. And for those who don't know the Pfand system, this basically pays you to recycle in Germany. It is something I am personally a fan of as well from living there. Andrew, Germany was an interesting country because along with Sweden, it was one of the few that actually had pride in its government or its system of government. That's something that we've kind of forgotten to do, or is also just tricky because of different polarization. And we'll get into that with the research as well. But it's also something that is rare these days.
And I'll tell you the other, which I think is a good thing and a fascinating thing, is that for many Germans, it was even, I had a conversation with somebody who's German only like 10 years ago who was saying it's not possible really to talk about your pride in being German just for fear that you're caught up with tailwinds even now of German nationalism in the 30s and 40s, that to say you're a proud German seemed like a challenge to other people. But how great that there are now being successive generations of people who have reinterpreted what it means to be German, who are confident and eloquent about saying what that is, and can take it out in the world. And I think it is interesting that that maybe they see in their central government even now something that's a little bit more kind of, I don't know, pragmatic in what it does. That it's an administration, it's bureaucracy in a let's be honest, who wouldn't love just a nice, dull, bureaucratic but successful government now? So maybe Germany's held on to that, and I think. Also, the interesting thing about Germany, that again, a federation where you have equal parts, they've got their own bedrock of confidence. So when they come together to the party, nobody feels like in the UK where that Scotland feels nudged out the way often by what's happening in London. They feel equal measure proud of where they live in their state, and also in the bigger notion of Germany.
Just finally, Andrew, the reason that I asked you here today, and we're doing this as well, is because I do think that despite the complexities, it's a topic that is close to what Monocle does, because we've always looked at soft power. We've looked at how countries export themselves to others. Is that a lost art today? No.
And again, I think that we're so overwhelmed by politics at the moment, and by the divide that sits in many nations between right and left, between populism and a desire to maybe tug to the left in politics, that we lose sight of what soft power really is. Soft power is simply telling your story, using your cultural assets, using your people to make friends and connect with people in a way that is ambitious and maybe lucrative at the end of the day, but is done in a way that is generous and interested. So I think that when you see, even now, the role of the British Council, if you see the way that the Goethe Institute works, if you see the way that people still look to American films to understand that nation in a kind of positive way, if you look at art tours and actors and all of these things, soft power can still work and have an impact. But as I say, I think that we're moving into a period where there's a substrata that sits beneath politics, where other people make connections, whether that's in their own country or across national borders. And they're the people that matter. When you talk to people about British culture when you go abroad, they don't see it as like thuggery and football hooligans. They ask you about your actors and your design and your artists. And when they come to this country, hopefully on holiday or to visit, they still see in the soft power elements of Britain something that's admirable. And it's the same for me when I go to other countries. Who doesn't love Brazil because of its music, its football, its cultural assets, its people? And that all works in this substrata sitting beneath the rather bruising politics of today.
Andrew Tuck, Monocle's editor-in-chief, really appreciate you delving into that question with us to kick off the show. And now here's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Peace talks between Ukraine and Russia ended after just 2 hours in Geneva. President Volodymyr Zelensky called the talks difficult and accused Moscow of stalling to drag out the 4-year war. President Donald Trump has urged Ukraine to take steps to make the US back talks succeed. The European Central Bank president plans to step down before France's presidential vote, which could see a far-right win. Christine Lagarde reportedly wants to shorten her term to allow President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz to help choose her successor. It follows a similar move by France's central bank governor. And the U.S. Air Force will repaint its presidential planes in red, white, dark blue and gold. The new look will appear on the next Air Force One, known as the VC-25B. The design updates the light blue style first used under President John F. Kennedy. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Now, the Pew Research Center is based out of Washington, D.C. It does dozens of surveys every year, mostly focused on the United States, but once a year it takes on this global survey like the one we're talking about today. The process takes about 2 years from idea to completion, and this one was really unusual as well because of the open-ended nature of the question. Pew literally asked people, what makes you feel proud of your country, and then let them write down their responses. Earlier, I spoke about the results with Richard Wyke, Pew's Director of Global Attitudes Research, and Laura Silver, Associate Director of Research for Pew. We began with Laura discussing the fact that many respondents focus on their own people rather than governments as a reason to be proud.
That was super interesting to us. So as you note, it was a kind of top theme in many of the countries we surveyed. So that was one of the kind of points of similarity we saw across the 25 countries. But even within people, the emphasis was different in many of the countries. And I really found that part powerful. So in Argentina, for example, often people talked about their public being united. They talked about unison. They talked about harmony. In Brazil, for example, people emphasized the welcoming nature of their public. In other countries, the emphasis was more on the dexterity of their people, their handicraft approach, their honesty. That was kind of themes we heard in Japan. So even when people emphasize their kind of their fellow citizens or their fellow people who live in their country, not even emphasizing citizens, but like the identity of those around them, they still did it in really different and unique, distinct terms that highlighted what different publics value.
Well, let's hear a clip now that brings in some of the elements, also the divisiveness that you see in this survey. This is Monocle's Sarah Bencher of Hungary.
For me, it's hands down the country's intellectual outputs across both science and the arts. You know, we've got quite a few Nobel Prize winning contributions to science, to literature recently, Krasznahorkai, to the filmmakers like the late Béla Tarr, who to me have revolutionized how we experience cinema. And even to today's underground artist scene with grassroots bands performing internationally. I got to see some of them in London, actually, which was really cool. We also have an excellent fish soup from the south of Hungary, from my grandparents' town, which I think everyone should try at least once. I also don't know if I'm allowed to go there, but you know, due to politics, Hungary lost quite a bit of its shine and in the last 16 years and gone a bit controversial. However, this April brings some hope to get back on Europe's heritage track.
That was Monocle's Sarah Bencher from Hungary. And Richard, Sarah brings up a number of themes that have come out through this survey, but one of them that I found interesting was some people do lean into the maybe more divisive politics in their countries, as Sarah does as well. Some people even say that they're not necessarily proud of their country. Was that something to be expected?
It was interesting how many people, use this question, which asked them about what they're proud of, to say what they're actually not proud of. And, sometimes that was related to politics. And as you say, political divisiveness, polarization. I think what we see there fits into a lot of what we found in our research generally, which is that, people are pretty frustrated with how politics is working in many countries. We see that, big majorities of most of the countries we survey say that elected officials don't care what people like them think. They don't necessarily believe that political parties represent their views. They don't feel like they have a voice in politics. So representation kind of isn't working the way it's supposed to. People necessarily, they haven't necessarily given up on democracy, but they're frustrated with how it's working. And, you see that a lot, coming out in these open-ended responses as well.
Laura, to bring you in on that, there's a diversity in responses, but also, I guess, in ideologies in the world today that we see in this. You see kind of some of the nationalism reflected in countries that talk about their strong leaders. That included Hungary, that included India. Others highlight diversity, multiculturalism, Canada, Indonesia. Others highlighted things like military security, Japan, Kenya citing peace, Turkey, Israel citing their military. It just felt like this survey brought out kind of the times that we live in as well.
I think you're exactly right. That really was one of the strengths of this project, the ability to see these similarities, people being proud of other people in their country. People being proud of arts and culture was a pretty dominant theme. But then exactly as you note, these extremely country-specific things. The emphasis on Japan on kind of peace and security, both internally, that it's a very safe country, but also externally, that they don't have a military. Or in Kenya, the emphasis on kind of peace and safety. Those are things that I think really allow these countries to be placed in a global context and to celebrate what makes them unique. We also found some other fascinating themes when it comes to things like multiculturalism, where people will speak about pride in diversity of caste in India, diversity of religion in Nigeria, diversity of ethnic groups in Australia. So again, even while we see these similar themes, we still see country-specific nuances.
Well, let's play one more clip, if we can, from a staffer of ours. This is Ryuma Takahashi in Tokyo, speaking of Japan.
Japan is often described as a homogeneous country, but I'm proud of its diversity and its soft power. When you travel around Japan, you will find different climates, languages, food, and local cultures, and I believe that this diversity shapes Japan's strong soft power. For example, we have a unique comedy culture, music, games, anime, and films, and we can enjoy these in our own language. And yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of Osaka, not central Tokyo, but even there, if I rode my bike, I would see a lot of rice field shrines with long history, ramen shop, hot springs, bookshops. I feel lucky to have grown up in a country where creativity comes from everyday life.
Ryuma Takahashi in Tokyo there. Richard, to bring you in on that, talk about the soft power that Ryuma was mentioning there as well. This is a feature of the survey. How does that play into kind of what you do at Pew as well when you look at the importance of arts and culture and even the kind of regionalism that Ryuma was talking about there?
Yeah, it's definitely something we've seen in our work in lots of different ways in terms of how people feel about soft power. Certainly one of the things we've looked at in our work on how people view the United States around the world over the years is that the U.S. is recognized as being a place that people kind of admire for its popular culture, music and movies and television and things like that. As far as Japan goes, it's also a good example, right? I think that the clip mentioned anime. I think that's something that comes out in some of the quotes here. As well as a cultural export that Japan is sort of shared with the world, and that's something that they're proud of. Korean respondents talk about K-pop, which of course has had this big global impact. So people are often very proud of their cultural exports that they've become known around the world for, or even something like your clip from Hungary. People mention Nobel Prizes, right? The number of Hungarian Nobel Prize winners is something that came up more than once. So people are proud of, I think, their things that they share with the rest of the world about their culture, and they're proud of the things that the rest of the world recognizes about them, right? Places where they stand out as being excellent at something, whether that's sports or science or artistic achievements and things like that. So when people see their country sort of recognized by the rest of the world for something, that's a big source of pride for them. And I think that is related to how they see their country's soft power as well.
Laura, just finally on that similar theme, did it strike you that people who are responding to this were speaking personally from their own love of country, or was there a lot of focus kind of on how the rest of the world sees them, how people see their country, and sort of showing pride, as Richard's talking about there as well, in the kind of things that they export to other nations?
That's such an interesting question. And I actually think it was both. It probably depended on the individual to some degree. A lot was personal. So there were some countries that really stood out for a code that we termed identity, but really an emphasis on I was born here. This is my family. These are my roots. We saw that in Eastern Europe quite a bit. We saw it elsewhere, kind of a top code in places like Kenya as well. People really emphasizing, I'm proud because I'm Kenyan. I'm proud because I was born in Poland. I'm proud because my family is Hungarian 6 generations back. So that's very, very personal. But then, a lot had to do with recognition from overseas. Not that people talked about it in that term, but you're proud of it because it's globally recognized as excellent. That's the case with brands, for example. In South Korea, we heard people talk about Samsung and Hyundai. We heard people talk about Turkish military exports. People are proud because the thing that they make is globally recognized as superior, excellent. Their culture is recognized. People have images in their heads of the Parthenon, of the Mona Lisa, of other things, and that brings pride to the people who cite it.
Richard Wyke and Laura Silver of the Pew Research Center, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing, and it's time now for a bit of a roundtable discussion with three of our staffers who have been wrestling with this question of national pride and, like Andrew Tuck, are ready to be thrown in at the deep end. I'm joined by Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent, Brazilian and British citizen, Chiara Mella, deputy editor of Confect and Italian and British citizen, and Nick Manise, Monocle's design editor, representing the Australian contingent. Nick, you need to add the British just to complete the set.
I do. I've been really dragging my feet. I mean, I'm eligible. I'm a permanent resident. I just haven't done or got my passport yet. It feels like admin, and I'm not a fan of admin.
I should specify, I haven't actually got my British citizenship yet.
So Chiara's in the same boat. Chiara's in the exact same boat. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of paperwork.
Solely representing Italy on this occasion, which is plenty.
So Fernando, you are the only person who can represent both.
I came ready for Brazil, but I have an answer for the UK as well.
Nick, I actually wanted to start with you with a comment that was in this survey, which just has me thinking. 1/4 of Australians mention this thing called mateship. Just explain that for us.
I mean, it's friendship, isn't it? More or less, it's looking out for your mates. I think that's it. I found that. I mean, as Australians, what really resonated with me, because I had a brief flick through it. Mateship, hugely important, don't get me wrong. We learn about it at school. It's like in our curriculum. It's embedded in everything from like the Anzac Day spirit, which is, it's our whole national identity that we've built off a military failure, which I think says a lot about the country, because that's what I wanted to steer towards. The other thing that was identified was the laid-back attitude, and I think that really comes across. That to me feels like the key Australian thing. We have this sort of laissez-faire approach. Again, the fact that a huge military disaster is our defined our national character, I think says a lot about who we are. And it's probably also why I haven't done my paperwork to get my British citizenship. It's just, it'll happen, mate. Relax.
Chiara, I want to bring you in on this. I know you have grappled with this question a little bit, as many people have. So just what are your thoughts on kind of Italy and what does make you proud?
Yeah, it's tricky that. I've thought about it quite a lot. Most recently, I think, because there was this great exercise in national pride in the recent opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics, which is always such an occasion to kind of showcase yourself to the world. And I was a bit reticent to watch it because at the moment, ideas of kind of national pride in Italy are very mired in the connotations that comes always when there is a far-right government in place that has made deliberate efforts to kind of co-opt this conversation, right? So we have something that's even called like a ministry for Made in Italy. And I think Italians, generally speaking, are very proud of Italy, and with reason, I think, because there are plenty of things in our august history to be proud of. But it becomes a slight kind of national obsession sometimes, a sort of like a weight of influence where you have all these grand riches in the past and it becomes hard to sort of detach from them a little bit and really reflect what the country is right now. Obviously, I think Michelangelo is great. I mean, don't get me started on the Renaissance. Absolutely brilliant time. But in my head, what makes me proud to be Italian today is something that has got to do with something smaller and something more tangible. And when I talk about culture, I think about the things that have value for us. Again, I was interested by something that some of your commentators were saying earlier about how it's always easy to be attracted by what the other people see in us, right? Our sense of national pride is always refracted through other people. a few years ago, I had the pleasure of making Monocle's Book of Italy. And it was a really interesting exercise because I kept wanting to make it kind of truer and truer. And Monocle's creative director, Richard Spencer Powell, kept sort of wanting me to put in things that people want to see about Italy. And we had this sort of tussle. And I think the book ended up in a better place because of it. So, you know, if it was up to me, I'd be like, oh, you know, I'm proud of Italy because of the films of Nanni Moretti and Alice Rohrwacher. I'm proud of Italy because of the cantautori, the singer-songwriters of history and kind of the poetry of you know, bands like Baustelle and Tra le ragazze morti nowadays. Can that be put on a Pew kind of big research paper that goes out globally? Perhaps it doesn't have the same ring as like pizza and pasta, but there are plenty of things that I think we can do in these countries that have so much kind of soft power in a way to bring it back to what makes us real and genuinely relatable.
It is so interesting the way you describe that, Chiara, because as you say, from the Pew researchers, they talked about this idea that for some people it was a personal answer, for others it was about how their country is seen. Fernando, to bring you in on this, I mean, did you even wrestle with this question, I have to ask? I feel like you are always the person who is so sunny and brings Brazilian culture to the rest of the world on our behalf.
I'm very proud of being Brazilian. Maybe too much. Maybe it comes even almost an arrogant way. But you know what I was thinking, Chris, when I was reading this survey. You know, in a world so divisive that we're living today, I think people are waking up to the importance of Brazil in society, you know, because of our welcoming nature. And, you know, another word that comes to my mind when I think of Brazil is flexibility. Whatever your religion is, your sexuality. I mean, sure, we have very religious people in Brazil, but, you know, I was there and sometimes, you know, they know I'm gay. People, they live together. There's a certain warmth in society. You know, I don't think it's actually a divided society. Of course, there's different social classes. You know, I'm not saying it's definitely not the perfect country in many ways, but I think the world needs more of that flexibility, you know, that joie de vivre. And I think it's always good to have a Brazilian in the room because we will soften things a little bit.
You're absolutely proof of that. Now, I knew that it was going to be hard coming on with Fernando because he's like the platonic ideal of like the Brazilian pride. I did want to say that the one single thing that makes me proudest of being Italian, I think, again, it's like a national characteristic more so than a specific kind of pinpointable thing, which is, in response to your flexibility, is Italians' aptitude towards fixing things, of not giving up on something that's a bit kind of fray at the edges, this idea that you can go back to things and make good things last and make things work, you know, whatever the matter. You know, we organize shoots and organize articles around the world constantly. And you know that if you're going to do something in Italy, it might seem like it's impossible, but it's kind of always possible in the end, right, Nick?
I mean, I'm actually doing that exact thing right now. And I feel like I can weigh in on this. I'm going to Milan next week and trying to organise a photo shoot. It seems like it's not going to happen, but I guarantee you it will. And I can relate because I am 1/8 Italian. So this is, but which I think also speaks to Australian culture. I mean, I was going to kind of jump off the back of what Faye was saying. I think people also love having an Australian in the room. I would also go with that. And I think there's this richness to Australian culture in that we have the oldest continuing Indigenous culture in the world, like dated as the oldest continuous culture. But we're also a nation of immigrants. So we have this real beautiful push and pull. And it's like, I think the thing that almost makes me proudest to be Australian is every border I cross, more or less, somebody will make a comment about Australia to me. They're either surprised how far I am from home, they love our curiosity, or they have their own story about the country. You know, the number of people that go and spend a year finding themselves in Australia is remarkable. Somebody's got a niece or a cousin that's living there that they've gone and visited. I think it really does give us this cultural richness, which maybe, sure, we didn't have the Renaissance that is, you know, held up in Western culture as the be-all and end-all, but we've got something now that I think is incredibly special.
And if I may add here, from all our countries here, Australia, you know, Italy and Brazil, it's countries that make people smile. Foreigners, if you're in a cab and you say, I'm from Italy, Australia or Brazil, mostly I would say the reaction will be positive. You know, I'm sure there'll be some exceptions, but it is true.
But maybe the ultimate test is, Chris, where do you want to go on a holiday? Italy, Australia or Brazil? Make a decision now.
Oh, man, you're going to put me right in the deep of it? Well, I've been to Italy, so that's my out.
Thank God.
That is a cop-out, but I haven't been to either of the two. Brazil's just a tad closer. Can I go with that?
Well, you would have got severely sunburned in Australia, so we don't want you anyway.
Yeah, maybe looking at Austrian convenience and, the United States is a whole other question right now. We're not going to get into for now. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Caramela, and Nick Manise, thank you so much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing, and before we end this topic, let's just hear from one more of our contributors. Here is Angelica Jobson on South Africa.
As a South African, I have a strong sense of pride for the diversity of the country. A rainbow nation, as we call it, that however imperfectly has held its centre since the end of apartheid. We have 11 official languages, 5 of them in our national anthem, and, for good measure, one of the world's most colourful flags. Like a mad family, we may have internal divisions, but we band together when it matters most. For example, on the sports field. I think something happened to the national psyche when Nelson Mandela presented the '95 Rugby World Cup trophy to the Springboks. Perhaps it was the first time in our new nation we were allowed to feel proud, and so we just kept going. If you've ever seen any of our national sports teams in the wild, you'll see how seriously we take this. They'll be dressed in the national colours, either tracksuits or blazers, with not a thread out of place. One British friend suggested this is a pride leaning towards arrogance. That's unfair. We just have better teams than most. I'm not a huge sports fan, but even I get a proud lump in my throat when watching anyone in green and gold play just about anything.
Angelica Jobson there, appropriately leading us into our final item on today's briefing on the Olympic Games. The Games are a source of national pride for every country and really as much about aspirations and legacy as they are a sporting event. There is a cultural and educational aspect to this as well, which is where the IOC's Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage comes in. Monocle's Andrew Muller spoke earlier with the foundation's director, Angelita Teo, to gauge just what this impact means to a sports competition. He began by asking her what she's been doing during her time at the Games.
A lot of meeting ups with future organizing committees who are planning their Cultural Olympiad. So we are showing them around what we have done here, really getting them to understand the value of adding culture to their program.
So when you're showing those people those things at this Games, like what's an example of that? What do you think Milan is doing well in that regard?
I think firstly, every city is unique. So when we come in, we first work with the organizing committee, trying to understand their vision of their Games. And with that, we come to support them with content, with storytelling, with objects from the museum. But at the same time, we also speak to local cultural institutions, museums, and try to find out if there's opportunities for collaboration. Because one of the things that we try to do is to look beyond the 2 or 3 weeks of the Games, but what can happen after the Games from a legacy perspective.
And what's your sense, though, from those conversations you're having here of what the hopes are for a cultural legacy attached to these Games? Because it does seem, I'm not sure what the word is, kind of comical to come to Italy of all places and talking about some sort of cultural legacy we can create. This is Italy. It has a cultural legacy that dwarfs that of most other nations. What could you possibly hope to add to it?
Like you say, everywhere in Italy, if you dig behind your own backyard, you'll find something Roman at the same time. But I think it's about modern history. It's about the people today and how that will be remembered, and the strength of the nationalism, national pride, and I think the Games is able to bring that. I mean, the Italians are doing very, very well in the Milano Cortina Games. I think they have surpassed their own expectations. So I think one has to really take that into consideration, that these Games will provide a lot of excitement and for the younger generation to propel in the world of not just sports, but to the wider world as well.
I mean, you referred briefly earlier to the Olympic Museum in Lausanne, and annoyingly, the only couple of times I've been to Lausanne, it's been far too quickly to actually go to the museum, which I would be very keen to see. But is there I guess, as you look around these Games, do you start to think of any particular artifacts or objects from here so far that might one day end up in a glass case?
One of the things that I feel is amazingly beautiful is the cauldron. But unfortunately, I've asked, to be honest, but it is not coming to Lausanne. The other thing which I feel for majority of people who watches the Olympic is the opening ceremony. The team has been here for the rehearsals, and we have a amazing photography collection that was done with a fashion photographer being in Milan. And at the same time, we are collecting the costumes for the ceremonies as well. So hopefully for maybe the 1 year anniversary, we'll be able to bring the photography and the costumes together for display.
I mean, again, having annoyingly not yet been to the museum, do you have a policy on how the museum addresses, I guess, controversial aspects of Olympic history? Because so far in these games, the most talked about artifact is obviously the Ukrainian skeleton rider Vladislav Heraskevich's helmet, which he was disqualified for wanting to wear. Can you imagine a few years from now, perhaps even a few decades from now, one day that might be in a glass case in Lausanne because it is part of Olympic history?
I think the role of museum in today's world is extremely important for discourse. And I agree with you that there are many aspects of the games that needs to be documented, and the best place to do that is really at a museum, and it is to open up conversation, for people to think about it. And the other thing I love what you mentioned is time. After some time, people will have slightly different perspective, and as a museum, we are more than happy to be able to address these things.
Because you come to this job from a stint as director of the National Museum of Singapore, so obviously you are very invested in museums and the role they still play. But what's your feeling on how they need to adapt? Because, okay, granted, I am of a generation who can remember before all this stuff, but I've been to a number of modern museums which now just seem more like video game arcades because they just assume that everything has to be interactive, that if there isn't buttons and flashing lights, then people aren't going to stay interested. What's your view on that?
I think my background is a little bit unique. So I'm not just a museum director, but I've spent many years as a festival director as well.
Okay.
So that kind of changes how I look at the role of museums. That museums are not just capsules themselves to present, but spaces for communities and people to come together to tell their story. And I think with that way of looking, museums will become more tangible in my opinion, because as the world go in one direction, people will start to be nostalgic about what has been before. So even for museums now, we're trying to make things, even though behind the scene is all digital, but when we talk about it being immersive and so on, we're also looking at it, making it more analog at the same time. One thing I'm very, very, should I say, put a lot of priority on is that museums should bring people together. Museum exhibition should not be the main product. It should be the context for conversations. And I hope that whether or not it's using digital content or using artifacts from our collection, if people leave the museum having had more conversation and more curiosity after having visited us, I think museums have done a good job.
But on that analog thought, do you think there is still a power that just the object has that a picture of it or a digital representation wouldn't have? Because obviously we can now replicate images of absolutely anything ad infinitum. Do you think people will still always want to come and see the actual thing, like whether it's the actual medal somebody won or the actual outfit somebody wore?
Yeah, we have digitized a lot of our collection. But the reality is objects themselves has a certain spirit or soul almost. You can feel it, to be honest. So for me, I think the digital aspect of the collection is to let people know what we have, but it is really to encourage people to see the real thing and to feel it. It's one thing to see a medal digitized and, blown up 100 times and you can see the detail. It's another thing to really see it sparkle in the showcase. So I think that would never change.
Well, just finally then, I have to ask, as the Olympic representative on today's show, for all that, as we have already discussed, you haven't got to see anything and you may well not, but do you have a particular favourite Winter Olympic event?
I studied in Vancouver, so guess which is my favourite? Curling.
Have you ever tried it?
No, but I've definitely been exposed to it, and for me, when I first saw it, I thought it was ridiculous. But once you learn about it, it's very complex. It's as complex as chess.
Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage Director Angelita Teo there in conversation with Andrew Muller. For more of our coverage from the Milan Cortina Olympic Games, tune in to our special Monocle in Milan program airing every day at 9 a.m. London time. That's all the time we have for this special edition of The Briefing, produced by Monica Lillis and Anita Riota. Our researcher was Annalise Maynard, our studio manager Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Christy O'Grady. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye and thanks for listening.